Good afternoon, and thank you for joining our briefing on the City of Philadelphia response to gun violence. This briefing is for press only. If you are not a member of the press, please check out and watch today's live stream on the City of Philadelphia's Facebook page, or you can tune in on 900 AM or 96.1 FM WURD. We will begin our briefing with opening remarks by Mayor Jim Kenney. Mayor, you have the floor.
Thanks, Dina. Good afternoon, everyone. I want to begin by addressing the devastating fact that we've already surpassed 300 homicides this year. I remember early in our administration, we're staying under the 300 mark meant, for some reason, that we had gun violence under control. That 299 or fewer souls lost was acceptable, but that 300 was suddenly an indicator that we had a problem. But for us to hit this tragic milestone mid-year is simply heartbreaking and unacceptable. And it's a clear indicator that this is a health crisis of epic proportions. I know that we all agree that this unrelenting rise in gun violence is a crisis. That is why I called the rise in gun violence a public health emergency, and our administration has been working on evidence-based interventions to stem the tide of violence. Our administration is working with urgency, but what I won't do is allow for the fact-based work to be overridden by the political expediency sought by some, and that is why I do not believe that a local emergency declaration will have any benefit for Philadelphia. Governor Wolf and I have discussed the potential for a state order like in New York, and we will continue those discussions. But a local declaration will not unlock new funding. We've already done that. I will not change the immense interagency coordination. It will not change the immense interagency coordination that is occurring. It will not change the work the Philadelphia Police Department is doing to get illegal firearms and dangerous actors off our streets. What I think it could do is have an unintended consequence and cause more fear in our communities, especially communities of color, already dealing with decades of systemic racism and poverty, which we are committed to getting rid of. But make no mistake, we know residents are afraid to attend cookouts or go to basketball courts, afraid to let their kids play outside. I hear it on my corridor tours. I hear it in community meetings. I read your emails. I hear you, and it truly breaks my heart. It truly does. Just this past weekend, a 1-year-old girl was shot while her mother held her inside a convenience store. This should and does outrage all of us. So I want to assure all Philadelphians that there is no greater priority for our administration than reducing violence and saving lives. I believe that the expanded resources, our economic improvements since the pandemic, and our new federal partnership around community violence intervention will have a positive impact. While some may not agree with my decision, I'm doing what I believe in my heart is the best for our city. And the allegations that I would take a different approach if this were happening more in white communities are simply untrue, unfair, and deeply offensive. I've consulted with members of my administration about this at great length. I'm extremely proud of the leadership team we put together to improve public safety and create healthier communities all across Philadelphia. This leadership not only reflects our Black and brown communities, much of our team comes directly from the neighborhoods most impacted by the violence. They know many of the victims personally. The fact that we have strong and passionate Black and brown voices leading this work, starting with our Managing Director, Tumar Alexander, and his first deputy, Vanessa Garrett Harley. This is in addition to the 3 co-chairs of our roadmap for safer communities, which include Police Commissioner Daniel Outlaw, Dr. Ruth Abaya, who guides our public health approach to this work, and Senior Director Erica Atwood, who leads our criminal justice and public safety cluster. That said, we cannot do this alone. We continue to need partnerships from families and witnesses to cooperate with police and report anonymous tips, partnerships with community and faith leaders, partnership with all levels of law enforcement, and partnership with organizations that provide prevention programming on the ground. And before I turn it over to Erica, I want to remind everyone that this Friday, July 23rd, is the deadline for grassroots organizations to apply for the latest rounds of targeted community investment grants. Funding ranges from $1,500 to $50,000 for this cycle, and applications are available online. You can learn more on the homepage of phila.gov. Over the last 2 years, this initiative has funded over 125 projects with a combined award of more than $2.2 million, and we need to keep this momentum going. So thank you, and now I'll turn it over to Erica for an update.
Good afternoon, all. Thank you, Mayor Kenney. Just wanted to give some points to folks around how we are prioritizing this work and some refreshers on what we discussed in our roadmap update in April. And so as as it relates to what the criminal justice and public safety cluster is working on with regard to violence prevention, please know that this is a priority for us, and these are the ways we are prioritizing it. One, we've elevated the roadmap. Initially, the roadmap was set. The roadmap for safer communities, our comprehensive violence reduction strategy, was under the Office of Violence Prevention. Understanding how important this work is and how complicated and complex it is, I've elevated it so I am chiefly responsible, sitting in the role, reporting directly to the managing director, and my entire team has shared outcomes around and constantly developing shared outcomes around how we prioritize safety and well-being of our neighborhoods. Secondly, as it relates to how we're operating with other city agencies and how we're coordinating our services. We have weekly tactical meetings that are led by my office where we are working with police districts that are most vulnerable to gun violence and experiencing high instances of violence, and our community partners, and working on not just environmental issues, not just public safety issues, but social service issues, real-time problem solving on a weekly basis in 12 districts across the city. Next, we have Dr. Ruth Abaya as my co-chair, is approaching this from a public health framework. We have what is called a Haddon Matrix, which really puts the rubber to the road as it relates to having a health, being it more than just in talk, but in action, and how is the work that we're doing really affecting the health and well-being of neighborhoods. Community partnerships are key. And so we all know about the targeted community investment grants. We've been doing that for a number of cycles. Like the mayor mentioned, our next cycle closes on Friday, but we are also developing new ways to engage. And so we've launched our Next Generation Task Force, which is a group of young professionals, of young leaders across the city that have the trust in the ears of those who are the most at risk. We are continuing to invest and increase our investment in our targeted community investment grants. This fall, we will be launching a Credible Messengers Academy, which will be a fellowship for those who are on the ground. We are working now with Council President and leadership in Council to expand the level and of grants we are able to provide to community organizations that are committed to this work. What we're focused on is sustainability of this work. What we're focused on is prioritizing those who we know are closest to the problem, are also closest to the solution. We are focused on assets over deficits. What are the things that we have that we can leverage, that we can utilize to support communities and make them more healthy and whole? And lastly, I will say this work is very personal to me. For those of you who don't know me, I have been doing this work for a better part of a decade, in both in this administration and the previous one, as well as a national level. When we talk to the White House, when we are talking to them about all the things that are needed to be successful in this work, please understand Philadelphia is in the forefront of that. I know that it does not always feel like that, but we are in it, and we are in it to save lives. We are in it to make healthy, hopeful, and whole communities. And with that, I will pass it to Dr. Jean Wright from Department of Behavioral Health.
Thank you, Erica. DBH IDS strategy in response to gun violence. DBH has been an active participant in the PRSC executive implementation team and the tactical team that Erica mentioned, which focuses on supporting Philadelphia Police Department in their efforts to reduce gun violence in the 11 pinpoint areas since September of 2019, and social service work group for group violence prevention. DBH IDS developed tailored plans for both tactical team and GVI to support the efforts of the public safety partners and directly serve impacted communities. Through these venues, DBH IDS has deployed multiple trauma supports and services in response to incidents of gun violence across the city to connect individuals and families to needed supports and help communities heal. DBH created and shared a community healing and trauma resource on social media through our Boost Your Mood campaign, and mailed the Addressing Trauma and Violence Toolkit to 6,000 block captains. Overall, DBH IDS strategy for responding to incidents of gun violence and supporting impacted communities aligns and supports the PRSC. The Director of Strategic Initiatives in the Commissioner's Office in DBH IDS, point of contact for the PRSC, and liaises with partners in this effort, including the Office of Violence Prevention, Philadelphia Police Department, OVP's Community Crisis Intervention Program, and SDP Prevention and Intervention teams. And the DSI is with me on this call today. Overall supports and services, I just want to give you a brief understanding of what that is. People who experience traumatic events have an increased risk of developing a range of behavioral health concerns. DBHIDS developed a variety of evidence-based practices and innovative approaches to raise the level of resilience and address the ethics of trauma in the city of Philadelphia. DBHIDS offers behavioral health services, which is mental health and substance use services and treatment, intellectual disability supports, and early intervention services in one comprehensive integrated system. Our robust continuum of behavioral health services are delivered throughout the community via our network of more than 200 provider agencies to adults, children, and families who are either uninsured, underinsured, or Medicaid recipients. We also collaborate with partners such as the Philadelphia School District, Department of Prisons, the Child Welfare and Judicial Systems, and other stakeholders to provide services in various settings. In terms of our trauma-informed care, I would just like to give you one example in each area. I won't go through an exhaustive example, but one promising practice for intervention and prevention of future violence is a warm handoff in hospitals' emergency departments. Healing Hurt People is such an example. It's a trauma-informed hospital-based violence intervention program that was developed by Drexel University and is expanding its reach throughout Philadelphia. Under our children's trauma services and supports, we have trauma screenings and assessments through the Philadelphia Alliance for Child Trauma Services, or PACS. Our Prolonged Exposure Initiative is an evidence-based cognitive behavioral focused intervention. Under our community-based programs and trainings, one example I'd like to share with you, in addition to our treatment approaches, we offer various community-based programs, including the Network of Neighbors Responding to Violence. The network responds to the traumatic stress associated with community violence, sudden loss, tragic accidents, suicides, burnout, or ongoing circumstances, such as living or working in a neighborhood plagued by high rates of gun violence. In addition to those supports, we also have trainings. And I'll give you just an example of that. DBH is committed to creating a more trauma-informed system of care by promoting trauma-informed practices, policies, and environments. Examples such as our trauma awareness, our work, our story, our work program, our DBH IDS partners with the Crisis Intervention Training Program with the Philadelphia Police Department, our Mental Health First Aid Program, which is a course that trains anyone living, working, or studying in Philadelphia to receive the basic skills necessary to learn behavioral health challenges and crises. And with that, I'd just like to leave you with just a few numbers. With our PACS, you can call 1-888-545-2600. We also have the same number can get you the Network of Neighbors, get you the Department of Member Services. And also for those who may be able to access through computer, you can go to healthymindsphilly.org to find many of these services as well, if you can access them that way. And with that, I would like to pass it to Police Commissioner Danielle Outlaw. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Dr. Wright. Historically, a rise in temperatures correlates with the rise in the number of shootings and homicides in our city. And after spending more than a year in quarantine, 2021, we all know has proven to be unique in many, many ways. However, the increased violent crime that we saw in 2020 remains problematic. This overall increase in violent crime has been noticeable over the past several years, and the number of victims we've seen in the city continues to rise. But with our baseline steady numbers steadily increasing in what we're traditionally the slower months, the numbers of victims in June and July have reached what were previously unimaginable levels. With the summer season in full swing, folks have really begun gathering with friends again, seeing family both indoors and out to enjoy some well-needed time together. The ability to socialize with the people we care about is a huge part of our returning to normal. And as social creatures, the inability or the ability To interact with others is essential to our emotional and physical well-being. Sadly, with people spending more and more time together outside, or even indoors, the opportunities to settle scores, both old and new, have made themselves available. For far too many, these conflicts aren't settled with words or even fists, but rather with knives, guns, and other deadly weapons. It can seem as though that anywhere we go isn't safe, but I want to reinforce that we cannot continue to live in fear. Our beautiful parks, our streets, or even within our own homes must continue to be our safe havens. Just this past Saturday, a 1-year-old child was shot in the leg when individuals began shooting inside of a corner store in West Philadelphia. DC Ben Nash, Deputy Commissioner of Investigations, will give you a little bit more details on that later in our presentation, and will also give you an update on the status of this incident as well as others. But what we're seeing is that our young victims are getting caught in the middle of a battle that has absolutely nothing to do with them. We talk about these incidents like they're purely tally scores, but the physical and emotional scars from these incidents last generations, and this isn't acceptable, and we cannot accept this as our new norm. We are continuously finding new ways to address this and to adapt as we are outraged by the continued lack of regard for human life. As Dr. Jean Wright just explained, the City of Philadelphia has a crisis line through the Department of Behavioral Health and Intellectual Disability Services. I encourage anyone who is experiencing trauma-related gun violence to please reach out to DBH-IDS or other local community agencies or someone they trust, their doctors or their clergy, for guidance on how to get the help that they need. As an agency tasked with public safety, it is our responsibility to ensure that everyone can enjoy the warmer weather as safely as possible, and to ensure that we're adapting to the ever-changing needs of the communities that we work in. We must do our best to operate on all cylinders. As example, while our wait times for calls to 911 have seen an increase over the past few months, we're working to fill positions within our police radio room. This Friday, I'm happy to announce that a new group of dispatchers will be graduating from their training. In addition, yet another class of new police dispatcher trainees, 26 in total, will begin their training on August 9th. This will add some much needed help to 911 and hopefully alleviate some of the wait times that we're seeing. I want to remind those who are calling 911 to please stay on the line through the ringing. When you hang up, you lose your place in the queue, so please stay on the line. Do not hang up. Additionally, in a time when most businesses and organizations are struggling to hire employees, I'm pleased to announce that on July 12th, we had a new class of recruits entered into the Philadelphia Police Academy. It was the first class to begin training in over a year. And while we're hopeful that we'll continue to put more recruit classes in to help with some of the attrition that has taken place over the past few years, it's obvious that it will take some time to get back to our authorized strength numbers. We hope to have at least an additional academy class begin their training before the end of the year. To that end, I'm happy to announce that we will begin a new hiring period beginning on August 1st. So for anyone interested, take a peek at www.joinphillypd.com for more information about the upcoming recruitment period, as well as to learn of the many rewarding benefits that come with a career with us here in policing. In closing, it's no secret that we're experiencing one of the worst periods of violent crime in our city's history. Last Friday, Philadelphia reached a grim milestone, our 300th homicide. And these are lives lost, entire communities affected, and family lives forever changed. This isn't just a statistical thing that we continue to report out on, and it certainly isn't just a Philadelphia problem. It's a national one that we're all seeing. And this too is a very real pandemic. And just like stemming the spread of COVID-19, this is going to take a concerted and diverse effort by everyone if we ever hope to bring it under control. I must stress again that while I do believe our police can still carry out our duties, and we are and will, it's not a job that we can take on completely by ourselves. Our officers are but one piece of this puzzle, and we need everyone to come together to do their part. Not just the community, not just the police, but everyone within the criminal justice system. As Deputy Commissioner Dales will discuss in a few minutes, and as we've been reporting all along, our officers are out there making constitutional stops, and getting dangerous criminals off the street. In fact, we're also well on track to surpassing last year's recovered crime gun numbers. Our number of shooting victims are up 33% over the same time last year. And to date, there have been 1,289 shooting victims. 123 of these shooting victims are juveniles, 17 years of age or under. And the number of juveniles shot this year is up 48%, a little up over 48% over last year. This isn't something that goes away. The effects of these shootings are long lasting and even lifelong. We have to remain vigilant with our young folks, especially our own kids. Talk to them, listen to know and hear what they're saying. Talk about how they're being impacted and affected by the things that are happening around them, and continue to make their business our business. Now here to talk about our pinpoint grids and our shootings is Deputy Commissioner Joe Dales, Deputy Commissioner of Patrol Operations. He will then be followed by Deputy Commissioner Ben Nash, who's the Deputy Commissioner over Investigations, who will provide us with this week's updates on individual cases that we wish to highlight. DC Dales.
Thank you, Commissioner. Waiting for my slides.
Yeah, give me a quick second here. Can you see it?
Yep, you can start right there. Yep. So we'll start with this slide, which is our citywide homicide and shooting victim stats. Looking at the top of the chart, year to date, as of July 18th of this year, Philadelphia had 1,268 shooting victims. And out of the 263, and out of 1,263, 304 were homicides. In comparison to last year, homicides are up 33%, 304 this year versus 228 last year. And shooting victims are up 26%, 1,263 this year versus 999 last year. And looking at the bottom left of the chart, it shows the motives for the homicides. They remain the same. The top three motives: arguments, drugs, and domestics, which is currently up by 155% in comparison to last year. Next slide, please. This slide shows the citywide homicide and shooting victim stats weekly comparison from July 12th to July 18th. If you look at the far right of the chart, we had 10 homicides for the week, 74 shooting victims, which include homicides. Also want to point out that within these numbers, we had several multiple shootings. We had 1 quintuple this week, 5 triples, and 13 doubles shootings. Next slide, please. This slide shows the comparison between citywide homicides and homicides that occurred in our pinpoint grids. If you look at the top of the chart, it shows citywide homicides up 33%. And looking at the bottom chart, it shows homicides in the pinpoint grids up 7%. Next slide, please. This slide shows the comparison between citywide shooting victims and shooting victims in the pinpoint grids. Citywide shooting victims are up 26%, and the pinpoint grids are down 10%. Next slide, please. This slide shows the year-end total roof arrests from 2017 to 2020. And the total roof arrest year to date for 2021 from January 1st to July 19th. VUFA is an acronym for Violation of the Uniform Firearms Act. So when I mention VUFA arrest, it basically means the person was arrested for illegally possessing a firearm. In 2020, we reached an all-time high for VUFA arrests that totaled 2,324. And so far this year, we have made 1,523 VUFA arrests. I would like to point out that this time last year, we had 910 VUFA arrests, which is a 67% increase when compared to the year-to-date total. Next slide, please. As of July 19th of this year, 3,364 crime guns were recovered in our city. A crime gun is any gun recovered by police as part of a criminal investigation. This does not include guns from buybacks or turn-ins. Also want to note that this, as of now, since January of this year to the present date, in reference to the buybacks, they received close to 600 guns this year. So that means a lot. There's a lot of guns on the street and people are turning these guns in. Last year, we recovered 2,411 crime guns by the end of July. Comparing that number to this year's number, year to date, which again is 3,364, we are currently showing a 37% increase, which is 901 more crime guns recovered this year compared to last year from January to the end of July. And again, we didn't finish July off this year yet. Next slide, please. Lastly, year to date, 306 privately made firearms, which are also known as ghost guns, were recovered in Philadelphia. Ghost guns are guns that are not serialized, unregulated, untraceable firearms that are assembled by a purchaser. I would like to also point out that in 2020, a total of 250 ghost guns were recovered by the end of the year. And as of July 19th of this year, we had surpassed that number. This shows a significant increase in ghost guns recovered this year in comparison to 2020 and 2019. But before I turn over to Deputy Commissioner Ben Nash, I would like to commend the FBI, the Attorney General's Office, our Narcotics Bureau, our Criminal Intelligence Bureau, and also our task force within the districts for the great work they've done over the weekend. This past weekend, our local, state, and federal partners, they assisted our department with cracking down on the violent groups in Southwest Division. And as a result of the operations, 5 members were arrested, 6 guns were recovered, and over $550,000 worth of narcotics were confiscated. And with that, I will now turn it over to Deputy Commissioner Ben Nash, who is the Deputy Commissioner of Investigations, and he will speak about the cases we wish to highlight.
Thank you, Joel, and good afternoon, everyone. Today, I'm going to highlight some recent investigations conducted by members of our investigative units where we could use assistance from the public. And in 2 of the incidents I'm going to speak on, there was gunfire that was directed at victims from a vehicle, and multiple victims were hit by indiscriminate gunfire. And also, as the commissioner noted, in the incident on North 50th Street, a 1-year-old was hit by gunfire while being held by his mother. This first video, it involves a triple shooting and a homicide that occurred on Thursday, July 15th at about 11:27 p.m. The triple shooting occurred on the 1800 block of West Susquehanna. A 26-year-old male was shot and killed. Also hit by gunfire was a 14-year-old female and a 24-year-old male. The investigators were able to recover the video that you're seeing on the screen, showing the occupants of a gray or a black Ford F-150 pickup truck with possible damage above the rear driver's side tire well. The truck also appears to have large aftermarket tires and rims, sunroof, chrome bumpers and mirrors, and a black and chrome running board. As noted by the video, the pickup truck slows down on the 1800 block of Susquehanna, and multiple people fire numerous shots as the pickup truck slowly passes the location. Anyone has any information on this incident or believes they can identify the truck or anyone that they know to operate that truck, please contact our homicide unit or our tip line. And now we're ready. The second video, the next 2 incidents are non-fatal shooting incidents, but they're also very dramatic and disturbing. The first one that you have up on the screen right now, it's being highlighted, occurred just this past Monday at 12:04 p.m., right in the middle of the afternoon, early part of the afternoon, in the area of 2400 North Colorado. You see an offender, a person we've identified as an offender, chasing after our victim. He chases that victim for over a block. You see him with the gun out, firing shots at the victim as the victim is running for his life. 22nd District officers responded to this scene. We located a 30-year-old male. He was shot numerous times throughout his body. He was taken by police to Temple Hospital. He remains in critical condition. We do hope that he will survive. At this point, he looks like he will. A second male walked into Temple Hospital suffering a gunshot wound to his knee. He looked like an unintended target. But from this video that was obtained from city cameras as well as other cameras in the area, this male wearing the t-shirt chased the victim, fired repeatedly at him, and shot him, apparently leaving him for dead. We're hopeful that someone will be able to recognize the individual captured on this video and provide assistance so we can identify that person and bring him to justice. Okay, you can move on to the third one, which is really our most disturbing of all. This video is going to show the recklessness that the commissioner spoke about. And in this video, the 1-year-old was shot while in the hands of his mother. at a store at 238 North 50th Street on Saturday. This happened on Saturday, July 17th at approximately 8:02 p.m. Our officers responded to that location at 238 North 50th. It's a convenience store. We located the 1-year-old child with a gunshot wound to his left leg. Child was taken to CHOP by our police officers, is still in stable condition, but remains at the hospital receiving treatment. Shortly after the officers responded to the scene, a 26-year-old male showed up at the hospital, and that's going to be the person on the left side of the screen. He shot in the arm, and he returned to gunfire. He was not permitted to have a gun. The vehicle that you have on the screen is the vehicle that we were able to determine was used by the shooters. The vehicle has been located just yesterday by Drexel police officers that were in the area in West Philadelphia. The vehicle was recovered. At this point, if anyone has any information about who could have been operating that vehicle, we urge you to contact the police and call in a tip. This incident just shows the complete, utter disregard for people who are going to fire into a store, and way too often innocent people. People have nothing to do with anything that could have precipitated the gunfire got hit. We're praying for the full recovery of the little boy, and his whole family has been traumatized. Anyone with tips, we always urge to contact our tip line, 215-686-TIPS, which is 8477, or contact Southwest Detectives directly. We hope to be able to identify the people operating that vehicle responsible for this terrible shooting. That's all I have for today. I'm going to turn it back to the mayor's office and Dina. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We will now move into the Q&A portion for members of the press. Because of limited time, only one reporter per news organization is permitted to ask questions. We're going to limit questions for the first round to this topic, and if we have time, we can open it up to other questions, other topics for the second round. We also have Armando joining us for Spanish interpretation if it's needed. We'll get started with Annie McCormick from 6ABC. Annie, you're up.
Hello. I have a question for Philadelphia Police, just in regards to the amount of guns that have been taken off the street this year. Wondering what the difference is between the amount of ghost guns versus, I guess, regular guns, you would call them. And also at this point, do you feel that even though you're making those arrests, that on the conviction side that they're coming through?
Hi, Annie. So yeah, we're actually seeing a steady increase in the amount of ghost guns that we're seeing. I mean, when you look at just the number that we have thus far, 306 compared to a couple of years ago was in the double digits. It's clearly something that we're seeing an increase in, and we need to pay attention to it. And I'm hoping that all the legislation that's being pushed for comes into fruition, because folks know, I mean, I think there is an assumption that these offenders don't watch the news, or they don't hear our comments, or they don't hear us when we say, yes, these are used because they're not traceable. We could compare it to a previous shooting and be able to determine whether or not it was used in another shooting, but they're unserialized. So there's no way to backtrack and figure out where these guns came from, making it more favorable for our offenders to use these. So we are seeing a stark contrast in just the number of privately made firearms or ghost guns, that we're seeing compared to previous years. And the numbers, again, are increasing. I think earlier on when we first started talking about this, we were saying, oh yeah, a small percentage are ghost guns. But when you look at the number of guns that we're just recovering, period, thus far, 3,300, that's crazy. And then you compare that to 300. I mean, the numbers are staggering. So there's that piece. And then, yes, there is frustration, right? We know that there's more that we have to do on our part. There's always more that we can be doing specifically to improve our clearance rates. I think it should also be noted that, in a lot of these cases, we have really good direction or really clear leads on where we could go with this, but we need either further evidence to corroborate Or, we present these cases over and we're being asked for more work on this. I think there's a belief that we're the ultimate determinants as to whether or not a warrant will be issued for a case. And that's not the case. And then, our ask would be of the arrests that we are making. I think my messaging has been fairly consistent since I've been here. We're talking about violent repeat offenders here. We've seen that there's patterns between our victims and our offenders, and that they have open cases or they've had multiple previous gun cases. So we're talking about the need for serious consequences for those violent offenders that have made it very clear that there's no respect for authority. They're going to continue on to do what they're going to do. And there's a mindset there. It doesn't matter who's out there on the street, whether it's a pregnant woman, whether it's a young child or an elder or whomever it is, they're not going to target practice. Wherever they are, they've made it very clear that they are going to shoot at the person that they're shooting at. So it's increasingly frustrating when we know, I'll even give, examples around, guns ending up in the hands of young children, these self-inflicted wounds, and they're, unintentionally killing themselves. We find that these guns are left around them and the owners are people with open gun cases or with previous gun cases. They've irresponsibly kept these guns before and they're back out again for whatever reason it is. So there's patterns here that we've been bringing to the attention of the public, our partners in law enforcement. We're not doing this to point fingers. We're doing this because we recognize there's a gap here that certainly needs to be addressed. We're all focusing on solving crimes, but focusing on these guns and the supply of guns and making sure that there are serious consequences for repeat offenders who utilize these guns illegally is critical. And that's also going to be a huge deterrent to what we're seeing here today.
Do you feel that on the conviction end, that all the cases that your office is bringing in with these gun arrests, do you feel on the conviction side that it's going okay on that end?
Well, that's my point.
Do you think there's more work that could be done?
Not at all. I think there's more work that needs to be done in that because we're seeing a revolving door. Again, there's themes and patterns that we're seeing amongst the shooters and the offenders. They have open gun cases, right? Or if they're not open, they have a history of VUFA, of violations of the Uniform Firearms Act, right? There's a pattern there. It's right there. The data is what the data is. And so again, when we throw this data out and we say this, it's not done to point fingers. We need these arrests to stick. We need for there to be serious consequences because these folks have shown that there is no regard whatsoever. And I'm not even talking about just for quality. We're talking, there's no regard for humanity here. None. It doesn't matter who you are. And so, yes, we're seeing it on the conviction end. We're seeing that we're the entryway. We're but one piece of this. And I think, as we have to align later on down the road in the criminal justice system as well, because we're but one part of it.
Thank you, Commissioner. Mayor, I have one question for you as well. This is really just about our presence. Commissioner Outlaw was with a number of the federal agents at Independence Hall asking, for help. They were showing that they're going to give assistance. You mentioned that you've had conversations with President Biden. We don't see you there, though, physically out at the scenes, and we don't see you physically at, say, that event with the federal agents working. What would you tell the public of Philadelphia right now that may be criticizing that they're not seeing you physically out there? Is there something else that you're doing that you would say that's the reason why, or what would you say to them?
Well, I don't believe it's appropriate for elected officials to show up at crime scenes. Crime scenes are under surveillance by the police. They're picking up evidence and collecting evidence, and I don't think that it enhances their ability to investigate and solve crime by having me there on television. Secondly, I'm not a law enforcement professional. I have met with the president. I've written him a number of months ago, met with and talked to him on the phone and talked to him in person. So we have that connection, and we are part of 16 cities that are involved in this effort to reduce gun violence. And we've had virtual meetings just this last week. So I think that from my perspective, I'm acting in a respectful way to get my part of my job done while the police are doing their job and while the group violence initiative people are doing their jobs. We all have our jobs to do, and me grandstanding at a crime scene doesn't help.
quick follow-up, in your conversations with President Biden and in that meeting with the 16 other cities, did he give any inclination as to what type of extra funding we might get or anything else extra, whether it be bodies on the ground, more agents, things of that nature?
Well, they're working on those details now. Additionally, what I asked him for specifically was direct federal involvement in arresting the people who are bringing the guns into the communities and having pretrial detention for some of these folks, because what happens is if they get out back on the street, they're not under supervision, and the federal government has the ability to detain you pretrial, which would get some of the really bad actors off the street and into the federal system. He said that he was investigating that and would let us know the results.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Annie. We're going to move on to Kristen Johansson with KYW.
Hi there. Thank you. Mayor, this question is first for you. I realize that, we sit on these meetings and there's a lot of discussion about funding for city grants and talks about like long-term reductions in violence, specifically out in the neighborhoods. But what is something that this city can do right now? Because a lot of neighbors and people that I've spoken to just feel like there's nothing being done differently right now for this emergency that's happening, that their kids can't even be outside to play.
What I would wish.
Okay, go ahead.
What I would wish for is for people to give us names of folks who are involved in this thing privately, so that we can get a head start on some of these investigations. I mean, you have these multiple shootings at social events, and no one cooperates, or very few people cooperate. That cooperation privately, anonymously, would be a big help for us in going after these guys. In addition, you see the videos that we've shown. I don't know how we can strategically put police at a particular grocery store at a particular time when these bad guys decide they want to drive by and shoot the place up. So information from the public anonymously giving us some heads up will allow us to go after these guys quicker and more effectively and get them off the street.
Well, two follow-ups to that. One, would you consider maybe bringing in some outside resources, since we do see that in the pinpoint grids, there's a lot of police officers that are out there, and that seems to have a reduction in violence. And the second piece to that is, would you consider maybe having then more press conferences, and whether that's not with the police department or whatever, so that, because we're kind of the medium, obviously, the medium to get out those messages. And we get these every 2 weeks, which we very much appreciate, but it's kind of like a data dump, and then we don't have,
Well, you certainly have the ability to call the press office to ask for information. I think we're pretty accessible and open to your inquiries and get you answers that you need. You have
say more frequently.
You have the ability to call the press office for information every single day. I mean, I don't know if Dina. I don't think Dina would ever.
That's not. I'm saying, would you consider having more press conferences generally for all of us to be talking about these shootings, because you're talking about having the victims or neighbors in the community reaching out? So would you be considering to have even more press conferences so that we can?
Look, I've had four. We've added them up in the last year and 4 or 5 months. We've had 435 appearances by either virtually or in person in that period of time. So this kind of intimation that I'm not available is pretty much bogus, because I've had a large number of virtual and in-person events even through the course of the pandemic. If you want to have more press conferences, I don't really have a problem with that.
Yeah, Kristen, we can discuss that. Every 2 weeks was also grounded in, that was enough time to also show trends and changes in some data that we were seeing. But, we're certainly open to having that discussion around frequency.
Okay. And then the other piece of that is, are you considering bringing in outside help to kind of help deal with what we're dealing with right now?
Could you give me an example of outside help?
I mean, we had, this was suggested to me just yesterday or 2 days ago, they said the National Guard, but having, extra bodies somewhere to deter the violence. That was suggested to me
I am not prone to put National Guard troops on the street. I don't think that is something that the city needs. We do coordinate with the FBI, with the ATF, with our federal partners, and with our state attorney general and their folks on the efforts on the gun task force. So I don't know whether Commissioner Outlaw, you want to be more detail about that, but I know we work with all of our federal and state officials on a regular basis.
Yes, we do work with our local, state, and federal partners, and they have assisted us with cracking down on violent criminals within our city. For example, the state police also were involved with some of the investigations in South Philadelphia, where we were focusing on violent gangs in South Philly recently. And the cases and the investigation is still active, so I can't go into detail. So we are getting a lot of support from other agencies. I just mentioned earlier about how the FBI and the AG's office assist us with cracking down on some of the Southwest gangs where shootings occurred over the weekend. And we're not stopping. We're going to continue to work together as a team. We actually met last week. We're scheduled to meet again, and we're focusing on the most violent folks in our city. We're not going to stop.
And Mayor, you also had a conversation, or you were talking about how, you need the entire city to kind of come together. Have you guys had those meetings with the district attorney, with the city council, all coming to the table and figuring out how to stem this right now?
Well, I meet with city council and leadership every week. We have conversations about the pandemic, about all subject matter. I'm available. Every single council person has my cell phone number. Anytime that they want to call me, I'm available, which I pick up myself. I'm as available as I can be to anyone who wants to contact me.
I meant the cohesiveness of everybody. You were elected mayor.
Right.
You ran for re-election. Have you brought everybody to the table, including the district attorney, to sit down and talk about what you can do to stem this? Because people out in the neighborhoods feel like there's no cohesiveness between the leaders.
Well, there is cohesiveness between the leaders, and I know that our criminal justice partners meet regularly with the district attorney to have those conversations.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thanks, Kristen. We're going to move on to Marcus Espinoza with Fox 29.
All right. Hey, Mayor, this is for you right now. I have two questions. One is there any reason or need to declare this an emergency, to put a title on it and say, and my reasoning for that is obviously the video you just showed. I mean, it looks like the Wild West. And then just before this press conference, 3 teens were shot an hour before, one of them killed. Is there not a need to designate this as a state of emergency in Philly?
We did dedicate this as a public health emergency about 2 years ago, and the labeling it as an emergency, unless it unlocks additional resources, unless it allows agencies to work better together, all those things are being done now. We unlock resources with council by putting up $150+ million in new funding for coordination and for help with this issue. I've talked with the governor. I don't believe any city in the country has declared this an emergency. I think there's been one declaration, and that's the governor of New York. And with that came money. The governor, Governor Wolf, indicated that he's not aware of any money that could come as a result of making that declaration. And it doesn't unlock funding. It doesn't change the interagency coordination. All these things we've been doing. Certainly, it's frustrating that it's not working as well as we'd like, but it is a struggle, and it's going to be an ongoing struggle. That I don't think labeling it anything is going to change what we've been doing to make it go away.
Would you agree? No doubt, this is a crisis, though.
If you heard my opening comments, I think I've said crisis a number of times. And again, we have declared this a public health emergency 2 years ago.
Now, as far as video footage that was released today and in general for the police department, is there a reasoning for the delay in video footage being released? Is it simply a technical issue? Is it finding the footage? Because it seems like people who speak with me and speak with other reporters at my station, they say this stuff normally would come out quicker. So is there a reason why it's taking so long for video surveillance to come out? Is it because of these bi-weekly press conferences that you just want to do them now, or can you explain that further?
Yeah, let me, if I may, Commissioner, the videos, we put out the videos when we have, first of all, we have to collect them. Sometimes because at the scene, it seems like, well, that guy has the video available at the store. Doesn't mean that we have access and possession of that video right away. The amount of time and effort that goes into tracking down a video can be sometimes hours, but oftentimes days and weeks. We track things down. There's also an element of there's raw video that's just too graphic to release. and it needs to be looked at for appropriateness, as well as for the ability to help us in the investigation. So we don't want to just do it for drama's sake of saying this is how bad things are. You know, the video that I showed about the homicide on Susquehanna, there's no images of the person that's doing the shooting, and we may not get many leads, but somebody might recognize that truck, and we don't have that lead, and that lead could be critical in solving that homicide on Susquehanna. The video that I just put out on Colorado incident happened 2 days ago. Today's Wednesday. That's gotten out pretty quickly. And the reason I highlighted that is because it's dramatic video that has something that can help us in an apprehension. Somebody likely recognizes the individual that's chasing after the victim, running down the street, even though that person has a COVID mask on. And then the video from the incident on Saturday, we have a lot of direction on that, but that's the kind of an incident that the mayor talks about community involvement. It's hard to believe that there are people out there that haven't heard about who's likely responsible for driving the white SUV. So there are tips that could be coming in if the community wants to get involved. People know who drive that car, but they haven't called in. So I highlight that one to say, get the community involvement going on. You know what your neighbors are doing, and people ought to be taking a level of responsibility. We do put out videos on a constant basis through our public affairs. So Marcus, there are videos that are released on a daily basis in a timely manner. I'm only up here on a 2-week basis trying to highlight things that may not have gotten additional attention with the idea of community involvement. We're not holding anything back at all. We're not going to put something out just for the sake of putting things out. They're put out when we believe that they can contribute to the apprehension and bringing the people responsible to justice. So that's the rationale behind all of that.
Okay, I appreciate it. And is there any footage or coming footage of the SEPTA shooting?
So the SEPTA shooting, we acquired a good amount of video footage, but we have good direction on that. So a lot of times what we will do is we will hold back images that we've recovered and work on it within the department before giving the person, if we have an idea of who that person is, notice that we know who you are. They may flee, they may try to hide evidence. So there was no need in putting out the SEPTA evidence at this point, but we have good direction on that. Oftentimes there's a determination made on what is the benefit to the investigation and to the public on putting it out. We don't want to just put it out to keep on showing this is the continued violence. And we didn't have footage from that showed the actual incident, but we were able to gather a significant amount of video from downtown to give us direction on who's responsible for that. I expect that within a week, we should be able to hopefully have somebody brought to justice for that incident.
So basically, if you're able to, use the video evidence, you don't need the public's help. Is that what you're determining on releasing or not?
Well, we're not going to put out video because it's just so graphic and we want them to see how bad things are or not bad. I mean, all shootings are bad. The mayor talks about, and the commissioner talks about the number of people dying. There's nothing good about seeing somebody continually shot. And there's no unedited videos that should go out because they're not appropriate for public viewing. The idea of the videos being released is, can you please help us? Sometimes it is a matter of, well, you can see how bad this is. There ought to be an outrage. There ought to be public indignation about the crimes that are being committed. How can that happen? But we don't want to just put it out for the sake of gratuitous, this is the violence that's going on. Can it help the investigation? Will it lead to an arrest? It's out there. We're always trying to recover video. And I continually talk about the need for more cameras, city cameras as well as private cameras. One of the best things that's happened in the last few years is the expansion of the Ring doorbell cameras. They have helped in so many investigations. It's beyond counting. It's beyond comprehension. Where we'd be without them is scary because of the things that the mayor talks about. Not having community outrage and people calling in anonymously or non-anonymously. Just tell us who you think is operating that white SUV and let us work on identifying that person and finding out if we can tie that person to that horrific crime. So the video, it works a lot in our favor, but we don't just throw it out for the sake of look how bad this shooting was.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We're going to move on to Argenis Figueroa with Univision.
Hello, good afternoon. Ok, voy a necesitar, Armando, tu traducción. Bueno, mi primera pregunta es para el alcalde. Quisiera que nos responda si está en crisis la policía y mientras llegan los fondos necesarios, si se logra formar a más policías, incluso que los planes impacten más a la comunidad. Los residentes con familiares que están muriendo en las calles preguntan por qué no pedir apoyo de la Guardia Nacional. Sabemos que acaba de responderle a una compañera, pero quisiera tenerlo en español. ¿Y cómo están haciendo para atacar los focos de violencia y de venta de drogas que saben dónde están?
This is a question for the mayor, and even though it's just been answered in English, we would like to have it for the Spanish-speaking community. And the question, Mayor, is the police in crisis? While we wait for funding to train more officers or plans that were announced that are in effect, the residents whose families are dying on the streets are wondering why the city is not asking for support from the National Guard to tackle the well-known spots where violence and drug dealing are taking place.
First of all, the police are not in crisis. They're doing their jobs every single day. As you can see by the data, they're taking twice as many guns off the street than they did the year before. They are making numerous VUFA arrests, more than they did before. So the police are doing their job. It's just the amount of guns that are available in our gun-sick society around the country. I do not think the National Guard's appropriate to be patrolling corners in our neighborhoods. And we're going to continue doing the things that the experts have suggested that we do outside of policing when it comes to interventions, when it comes to mental health and job training, getting our neighborhoods back in order, and trying to give people opportunities as opposed to having them under a police state or a state of Army Guard.
Primero, quiero decirte de que no pienso que la ciudad se encuentre en crisis con su departamento de policía. Se ve que la policía está realizando el trabajo que se les encomendó y ellos están retirando, según los datos, la cantidad doble de armas que están circulando por las calles y los números de arrestos también se han elevado comparado con el año anterior. La policía está haciendo su trabajo. El problema es la cantidad de armas ilegales que están circulando por la ciudad y por la nación. Este es un problema que obviamente es muy complejo y creo que el que la Guardia Nacional esté patrullando nuestras calles y nuestros barrios no es algo recomendable. La policía va a continuar haciendo su trabajo y nosotros estamos suplementando esto con la capacitación de salud mental y con la capacitación de los oficiales de policía. Hay que darle tiempo a que las cosas mejoren, pero no estamos de acuerdo con que venga la Guardia Nacional a patrullar a la ciudad.
Ok, entonces mi segunda pregunta pudiera ser para el alcalde o la comisionada o ambos. Haciéndose una autocrítica, a su parecer, ¿qué es lo que no está funcionando para detener la violencia armada? Porque vemos que en menos de una semana hay 9 muertes y cuando también presenciamos un tiroteo, pues algo no podría estar funcionando.
The second question may be for the mayor or the Commissioner Outlaw, and it's about having a reflection of what's been happening. What do you attribute the failure to stem the gun violence? We've seen a shootout recently, and there were 9 deaths in less than 1 week. Is this an indication that something is not going right?
Well, something's not going right in our society. First of all, we've been just through a pandemic where, hundreds of thousands of people lost their lives. I think 4,000 or 5,000 folks in Philadelphia died of the disease. So the economy was thrown into turmoil. People were stuck in their homes, could not go out. And we have this flow of weaponry that because of the so-called Second Amendment, people have access to that should never have access to it. The state legislature, despite our local state reps and senators trying their best, will do nothing to stem the flow of guns. The federal government, the Congress will do nothing to stem the flow of guns. And we wind up having to deal with the end result of that problem. So if you put together the availability of guns, the effects of the pandemic, the effects of poverty, and the effects of social media, where people are going hog wild on social media, calling each other names and creating these vendettas. It's a struggle. There's lots of things coming at us at the same time, and we are doing our best to put in place things that will work, things that make sense, things that are data-driven and that are driven by experts in these areas, and continue to support our police department to get these guns off the street. I mean, most of these situations, if you remove the gun from the equation, it's a fist fight. And that's the way it used to be, and that's the way it is. It isn't that way anymore. The gun is the problem, but all those other factors also weigh in and add to the issue. And we're working on poverty, and we're working on community investment, we're working on housing, we're working on mental health, we're working on addiction. I mean, these are all these things that have gone downhill to the cities to deal with without much help from anywhere else.
Efectivamente, Argenis, algo no está yendo bien, pero no es algo que no esté yendo bien solamente en la ciudad de Filadelfia, es algo que está yendo mal en toda la ciudad y en las ciudades del país alrededor de los Estados Unidos. Esto es algo que tiene que ver también con los efectos de la pandemia, en la cual ha habido cientos de personas y cientos de miles de personas que se han infectado. También tenemos 4 a 5 mil personas que han muerto en la ciudad de Filadelfia. Esto se agrava con la situación de la economía, obviamente, y también con el hecho que la gente ha tenido que estar encerrada en casa. Pero la razón principal es el flujo descontrolado de armas a la ciudad, armas que no están autorizadas, y por el hecho de que tenemos la segunda enmienda constitucional que les permite a gente que no debiera tener acceso a estas armas, el acceso a las armas, pese a los esfuerzos de los representantes a nivel estatal y de los senadores que no están haciendo su trabajo para impedir el flujo de armas de fuego. El gobierno federal le ha pedido al Congreso, pero parecen que ellos tampoco están haciendo nada y tenemos nosotros que enfrentar este problema. De manera que si se pone conjuntamente la disponibilidad de las armas de fuego, los efectos de la pandemia, más los efectos de la pobreza, los efectos de los medios sociales en los cuales la gente está explayándose para insultarse y para crear esto, entonces es una lucha. Y muchas cosas hemos tenido que enfrentarlas al mismo tiempo. Estamos haciendo lo mejor que podemos, pero vamos a implementar medidas que tengan que estar basadas en los datos que recibimos y que los expertos nos indiquen para esas áreas. Yo continúo apoyando a nuestro departamento de policía para retirar estas armas de las calles, porque en muchas de estas situaciones, si se retirara el arma de fuego, sencillamente lo que queda es una pelea a puño abierto, como solía ser antes. Y ya no es así, porque las armas son lo que es el problema. Vamos a trabajar obviamente con la inversión para tratar de retirar las causas de la pobreza, con la inversión comunitaria. Estamos trabajando también para proporcionar viviendas, con los problemas de salud mental y de adicción. Todas estas cosas se han caído y le han recaído a las ciudades para resolverlas sin mucha ayuda efectiva. Entonces vamos a continuar haciendo lo que podemos para resolver las múltiples causas de este problema, subrayando que lo principal es la disponibilidad de armas ilegales en la ciudad.
Gracias, Armando. Ya para finalizar, quería saber, dado que el alcalde considera que la situación actual de Filadelfia no es una emergencia, ¿cómo recibe la noticia sobre el nombramiento de que Filadelfia, según la revista Time, está considerada como uno de los 100 lugares que se pueden visitar, cuando se sabe que también la ciudad es una de las más peligrosas de los Estados Unidos?
My final question for you, Mayor, is given that you don't consider the current situation an emergency, how do you take the news according to...
Well, first of all, that's not true. We declared this a health emergency 2 years ago. So don't put words in my mouth. This is an emergency and this is a crisis. It's just that the declaration of a state of emergency does not release anything to improve our situation in dealing with the problem. So it is an emergency. It's a health emergency. And we've declared it as that, and we're working in that regard with data-driven information. So that's not what I said.
Primero quiero recalcar, Argenis, que yo no he dicho esto, que por favor no pongan palabras en mi boca. No hemos declarado un estado de emergencia, pero hace 2 años declaramos una crisis y una emergencia de salud pública. Voy a continuar con tu pregunta. Entonces, Mayor, then, according to Time magazine, Philadelphia is both on the list of great cities in the world to visit, as well as the second most dangerous city in the United States.
What? I'm sorry, was that a question?
Argenis, era parte de la pregunta, ¿verdad?
Sí, era parte de la pregunta, sí.
Apparently, Time magazine has named Philadelphia one of the greatest places to visit, as well as the second most dangerous city in the United States.
Well, I really don't. I mean, it's nice to be on lists, but I don't necessarily go by what publications say. This is our city. It's got great things and it's got struggles and it's got issues we have to deal with. So on one hand, I'm happy. On the other hand, we're going to continue to work to get us off that list.
Lo que tengo que decir es que es algo bueno el estar mencionado en una lista, pero yo realmente no me guío por esas cosas, lo que digan las publicaciones. Filadelfia es una gran ciudad donde vivir y por supuesto tenemos nuestras luchas y nuestra esperanza es continuar trabajando para hacer la calidad de vida de la ciudad más segura y más eficaz para todos sus ciudadanos y para los visitantes también. Gracias.
Muchas gracias a ustedes.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. We're going to move on to Stephanie Jimenez with NBC 10.
Hi, I hope that everybody can hear me now. Okay, so my first question is for Dr. Wright. You know, there are two things that are happening right now. First is this triple shooting that just happened in West Philly just over an hour ago. We know that one of the teenagers here, they were all teenagers, one of the 15-year-old boys was killed as a result of this shooting. So when you talk about mental health services, how is the city prepared to help that victim's family? Can you tell us about that?
Yes, I will briefly say that when I mentioned the network of neighbors, that's one of the resources we have available. And I'm going to bring on our Director of Strategic Initiatives, Andrea Brooks, to help answer that question. Thank you, Stephanie.
So at DBH IDS, we immediately respond and work to get the contact information of the families and individuals that have been impacted so that we can identify their needs. And then based on what their needs are or what they've identified, so we make connections with our behavioral health treatment providers, with trauma support services. As Dr. Wright mentioned, that could include network of neighbors, but it could also include some other initiatives as well. So we respond immediately to work with the family to get their needs met.
So you've already been here to the site?
Not yet today, no.
Okay, but you will be in touch with the family. Have you gotten in touch with the family of the pregnant woman that was shot yesterday, about half a mile from North 56th Street here in West Philly?
We will be reaching out to them.
So when you say immediate, what does that mean? Is that a day, 2 days, 3 days?
So depending on the nature of the incident, if someone is hospitalized, that might be their number one priority, is focusing on their immediate need there. So we might introduce ourselves and then have a more detailed follow-up conversation after that once they're home and they're a little more stable, and then we can talk about trauma supports and what they experienced. So it looks a little different for each person because we want to meet the person where they are and what they're going through in their situation.
All right, thank you. And Mayor Kenney, this question is for you, just as far as the funding for gun violence prevention programs. If I'm just a regular Joe here on the street, when am I going to see that money being, like, what specifically is it going to be spent on in a way where any person in Philadelphia will be able to tell the difference?
Well, there's going to be a process where mainly organizations will apply for the funds. I mean, I doubt we'll be giving grants to individual people. Mostly will be organizations, nonprofits. They're established in the community that have a track record, that have spent public money before. And that's a process. It's sad to say it takes a little bit, but we still just can't send money in envelopes. We have to have contracts and the like. So Vanessa, do you have something to add to that? Vanessa?
Yes, good afternoon. So the mayor has rightly said that it does take a process, but there are two things that are going on. Some of the community grants are coming under the targeted community investment grants. Those are the grants that you heard about that are going up to $50,000. And then the new additional money that we have been given by the city council and the mayor will be putting a total of around $20 million in the community. Those grants can be much higher than the 50. Predominantly, there will be requests for proposals out. We will be reviewing the proposals that come in for those particular grants. Those grants will include, and we will also be building in or utilizing those funds in addition to the grants for capacity building, the ability to be able to help some of these organizations develop and do technical assistance, as many of them have been doing the on the ground work in the community, but they still need to be able to build up infrastructure and other things of that nature. And also evaluation, because we do still have to be good stewards of taxpayer money and try and make sure that the money is being spent and that it's having the desired results. So RFP will be going out shortly. We are in conjunction with City Council working collaboratively to do what we're calling a monitoring group, so that I know City Council is heavily invested in this, and obviously they care about all the what's going on in the city as much as we do, and want to make sure that the money actually gets to the ground as quickly and efficiently and sort of fairly and equitably as possible.
Okay, and Mayor Kenney, this is my final question here. Can I just have your reaction to these 3 kids being shot here in West Philly? One of them, the 15-year-old, passing away just about an hour and a half ago. Is it easy to get jaded every time you hear these stories?
No, this is a sadness that it should affect every Philadelphian. We are losing a generation of young people who could be great contributors if they could keep their lives and not lose it. This job, look, it's not an easy job, and I carry a lot with me, both on my back and in my heart. And these kinds of things do affect me, whether any of you think that they do or not. They do affect me, and I try to maintain my composure and maintain myself in public and not act out. But I will tell you that it's hard, and whether you believe me or not, it's hard. And I deal with this every single day, not as closely as families deal with it, because it's their family, it's their child or their grandchild. But it does affect me, and it affects me not in a good way. It affects me in a long-term negative way. And I hope when I'm done this, I'll be able to straighten out my head and heart.
Mayor, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next up is Isabel Sanchez with Telemundo.
Thank you so much. Armando, pues necesitaré tu ayuda y tu asistencia para esta pregunta. Mi pregunta, similar a la que acaba de hacer Estefanía, dirigida esta vez para personas de la policía que se mantengan aún en la llamada. Su respuesta, su mensaje para estas comunidades que siguen viviendo hechos violentos de la magnitud de la embarazada que salió herida ayer, de estos 3 adolescentes que fueron disparados. ¿Cuál es su mensaje para esas comunidades que se sienten sin esperanza al ver la cantidad de violencia que ven a diario?
This is a question for the police commissioner or the representatives of the police in the city. And this is my request for your message or your response for the community that saw the shooting of the pregnant woman yesterday and the 3 teens that were shot just now. And what you would say to them to stem this hopelessness that they feel about it?
You know, as I mentioned earlier, and thank you for that question, I don't want us to live in fear. You know, we all live here, we're all residents, and we have to take back our community. We have to take back our blocks. We cannot continue to live in fear. With that said, you know, as the mayor mentioned, this gut punches me each and every time. It doesn't get any easier to meet with these families. It doesn't get any easier responding to these scenes, seeing the community members that are impacted, whether they knew these victims or not, or even the shooters, because it happened in their neighborhood or on their steps, on their porch, and every time they go home, they're reminded of this. It's tough. But all hope is not lost. And I cannot relay enough that it's important for all of us to work together. And, you know, I will continue to say, as long as I have this seat at the table, that we will bring our partners together, whether they like it or not. Unfortunately, you know, we're having these conversations publicly, you know, via a press conference. And I am seeking to get more of this conversation and dialogue behind closed doors. It's been happening. It absolutely has been happening far more than prior to my arrival. But I think, you know, we can be doing this more frequently. The other piece is that, you know, there has to be alignment amongst all of us. It's one thing for us as a city to prioritize what we're going to go after, what we're going to enforce. It's one thing for me as a police commissioner to say, here's what we're going to do, here's what we think is important, and we are going to enforce these actions. But when you bring groups together that don't necessarily, we don't have the same accountability mechanisms, we're all accountable to the community. But, some of us are elected, I am not. The one common thing that will always be here are the police, and our mission doesn't change. But when you have different stakeholders working together, it can be challenging sometimes to get us all on the same page, saying that we have the same priorities around enforcement. With that said, that doesn't mean that I sit down and I take my ball and I go home. I'm going to keep at it. Your police officers
La respuesta.
as well as your leadership. Did I cut off?
Yes, briefly.
Yeah, but Armando can get started.
Okay.
Isabel,
But I think you get my point. All hope is not lost.
Thank you.
En resumen, Isabel, no hemos perdido toda la esperanza, obviamente. Como nos ha dicho el alcalde, esto es algo que viene sucediendo, pero no es algo que no tenga una respuesta. Mi mensaje es que obviamente es que nosotros vamos a responder como hemos estado respondiendo hasta ahora, y el impacto que ha mencionado el alcalde lo siento yo también, porque es algo que nos afecta. Son personas que conocemos, gente que vemos en nuestros barrios, en nuestros porches. Nosotros no queremos vivir en miedo porque no podemos vivir con temor. Queremos que todos los residentes retomen su comunidad y tenemos que hacerlo bloque por bloque. Como lo ha mencionado el alcalde, los miembros de la comunidad que han sufrido el impacto porque son víctimas o conocían a los tiradores o porque sucedió en sus barrios, no pueden tener miedo y ceder a la paranoia. Nuevamente, les recuerdo que es algo difícil, pero no hemos perdido la esperanza. Es importante que todos trabajemos juntos y, como saben, continuaré haciendo como lo he hecho hasta ahora, porque tengo presencia en esta mesa para atraer a nuestros socios comunitarios, así quieran o no, porque desafortunadamente tenemos que trabajar juntos para no perder la esperanza. Hemos estado teniendo estas conferencias de prensa públicas y creo que se ha hecho más de lo que se hacía anteriormente, pero también queremos continuar este diálogo y esta conversación tras puerta cerrada. Esto ha estado sucediendo bastante, pero creo que es una parte y tiene que alinearse todas las fuerzas entre todos nosotros, porque yo, como oficial de policía, además de comisionada de la salud, puedo dar una cierta prioridad. Pero es importante que todos trabajemos juntos, porque no necesariamente todos tenemos la misma responsabilidad ni los mismos mecanismos de responsabilidad para responder. Como saben, algunos de nosotros somos electos y ustedes saben que yo no lo soy, pero hay algo que tenemos en común, que no vamos a perder la fe, no vamos a perder el sentido de nuestra misión y vamos a traer a trabajar a todos juntos porque tenemos la misma prioridad de hacer cumplir la ley, de proporcionar una ciudad segura a todos los residentes. Por lo tanto, la respuesta final es que no hay que perder la esperanza. Se está haciendo lo que se puede y se va a hacer más aún para responder a esta crisis. Gracias.
Muchas gracias, Armando. Thank you so much, Commissioner. I appreciate it.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Okay, thank you both. We're going to move on to Anna Orso with Philadelphia Inquirer.
Hi, everyone. I know a couple folks have mentioned the triple shooting at, I believe it was 55th and Race that just happened this afternoon. Is there anything the department can say at this point? I know it's early, but about what may have happened here, or provide any, update on that investigation and as it's ongoing?
Yeah, Joel or Ben, do you want to share at least what we do know about at least one of the victims right now and why we believe it wasn't a random shooting?
I mean, at this point, it is, as you said, it's very early. We've been here, you've been here. I'm not out of the scene, but the information I received is that they were operating a vehicle. The three young men were inside of the vehicle. The vehicle was shot at numerous times, and one of the persons from the vehicle has been pronounced. We have no idea at this point what the motive is. It's way too early. We'll be out there trying to find out from the survivor what was going on. Is there anybody targeting them? And as I mentioned before with Marcus, the video will more likely than not be critical, whether we capture it from the scene or we get people who are described leaving the area. That's what will we'll be going after, and we'll try to figure out a motive down the road. But right now, it's way too early to say. It's extremely preliminary, very tragic and heartbreaking.
I can add to that. So far, we have two were pronounced at this point. One of the victims, he was shot in the past back in June. So we don't know if this is connected to that shooting that occurred back in June. That's all we have at this point.
When you said two were pronounced, do you know which two were pronounced? I believe there were two 15-year-olds and a 16-year-old.
One, I believe was 18, I believe, the last one who was pronounced.
So it was two 15-year-olds and an 18-year-old that were shot?
Yes.
Okay.
So far.
Okay, got it. And my only other question is there any update at this point on the shooting last night at 5400 Pearl Street, the double involving the woman who was pregnant? Anything that's known regarding what happened there? Same sort of question.
I can just tell you there was some kind of an ongoing dispute. The parties involved are not completely unknown to each other, and it looks like somebody brought somebody else to settle a score of some kind. We'll be working hard to identify the people who are involved, but at this point, she's going to survive. The child's going to survive, as I understand it, and we'll work that until we can identify who's responsible. It was somebody that was brought in order to harm somebody else. One of the people involved in the dispute brought somebody else to this situation.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Anna. Next up, we have Jimena Conde with WHYY.
This question is for the mayor. You've referenced the gun violence public health emergency you declared 2 years ago a couple of times. Can you go over some of the components that are still in place and whether the declaration has yielded any results or moved the needle on gun violence?
Well, clearly we're still have a problem that's growing. I don't have the statement in front of me. I'd have to get it and go through it to determine what we're still doing, what we are not doing, and what effects they've had. So I wasn't prepared to review a declaration today.
And then my other question is, you've sort of laid out what you think the public could do to alleviate, the gun violence crisis. Curious, if you think the city has done all it can, in terms of preventing and reducing shootings in the future.
I mean, there's always more to do. But and I'll say this again, and people get annoyed when I say it, but if you take, it sounds simplistic, if you take the gun out of the scenario, we don't have these issues. And when we take people who have had multiple gun arrests, can still get their hands on weaponry, we're going to continue to struggle with this. No, the city has not done all it can do. We're doing more. As a matter of fact, reflected in this budget is $155 million more that we can do. And we're hoping that kind of approach that's data-driven will help turn these numbers around. But I don't know when they'll turn around. We're hoping it's tomorrow, but we're doing our best in providing resources in the best places we think are going to have an impact. And we've never been through this before, just like we've never been through the pandemic, like we were never through the level of civil unrest that we went through in the last year. A lot of these things are new to everybody. So we'll continue to invest and to pivot and do things we need to do based on data and expertise, and hopefully continue to get this resolved.
If I could just jump in, Mr. Mayor, and add a little bit with regards to the public health approach. And when it was called out 2 years ago was when the mayor called for a plan around gun violence. And that's when the original roadmap to Safer Communities was written, which was our gun violence plan. And that was approaching it from a public health background. We are still continuing and in fact expanding in that area. Some of the things that were done then that are continuing to be done was bringing all of the city agencies together, vast majority of the city agencies, and ensuring that everyone understood that the gun violence was the number one priority for this administration. We still work in tandem with that. There are regular, ongoing, weekly, and sometimes multiple times a week meetings with all of the various city agencies to see how they can contribute to helping with the gun violence and to helping with the communities, because when one of these shootings occurs, it is devastating to the family and the victim, we understand, but it's also devastating to the community. And so you need these other city agencies agencies that will help in trying to alleviate some of the problems, some of which are on this call. DBH, certainly our health department partners. In fact, we have since that time frame, Dr. Rufa Baya was brought in to run the injury prevention unit at the health department was created. That is still ongoing and in fact may be expanding. We're starting to work on injury prevention dashboard. We have established a homicide review team where we try to look at it from that epidemiological perspective as to what can we learn from some of these deaths. The roadmap was revised very recently, and you may have remember from some of these press events where we called out what was done. There is still an executive leadership team that meets on the regular around this roadmap. The pinpoint information that was part of the plan, Operation Pinpoint, as you heard the police talk about, is still there and existing. We are definitely not where any of us would like to be or want to be around this gun violence. We have begun to make some statistical progress that we could see at the end of 2019, where in the pinpoint areas, we were beginning to see that the shootings and homicides were starting to go down. And we believe that some of the tactics we were taking was really beginning to take hold. And then the pandemic hit. And your violence prevention efforts were dramatically impacted and set back, as most of them are things that you have to do in person and wouldn't necessarily align with the CDC guidelines around COVID-19 and in person. But much of the work is still going on and in fact being expanded, and will be expanding the work that the health department is doing in that public health approach. And a lot of it is also the more recent expansions of the roadmap has been to, we brought the community partners in. We started to target the community investment grants. We're only expanding those and expanding the collaboration that we have with the community. As we said, they are key in this work and with our other criminal justice partners.
Okay, thanks.
Well, I had.
Jimena, are you good?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Okay, our last question is Layla Jones with Billy Penn.
Hello, thank you all for extending the time of this. So my first question, I'm not exactly sure who it's for, maybe someone from the MDO. The last time we had one of these briefings, the city presented info that, chronic joblessness is correlated to increased gun violence. And I want to know, how is the city utilizing departments that work in the areas of employment and business? So like labor department with the laws and discrimination, OEO and commerce. How are they developing plans to improve, city labor practices and opportunities with an anti-violence lens?
Hi, Layla. I'll take a stab at your question. Not sure I'll be able to answer all of it concretely. We definitely work with our partners over at Commerce, where the Office of Workforce Development is now housed under them. And also, just so happens, OEO also comes under that department. We are trying to do as much as we can to develop a workforce continuum, which is everything from kind of those work readiness programs, because many of the folks that we are involved with do not necessarily have the requisite skill sets that they would need to get a job, and we want to get them ready, but also trying to expand what programs we can bring in. We have been exploring bringing in Ready Chicago, a model that they have been using in Chicago, and we'll be bringing in as they conduct a feasibility study here in Philadelphia to see how that works here. We also have some other things under our GVI program, as we call it, or the Gun Violence Intervention Program. We're working with the Center for Employment Opportunity out of New York City, which is used to working with high-risk populations and helping us be able to get jobs for some of these folks. Everybody that we entertain in this workforce arena, we try to make sure that everybody is looking at this work from an equity lens and understanding that it is a high-risk population that we're dealing with. And unfortunately, the population that we're dealing with in the gun violence we're experiencing here in the city, both the victims and the perpetrators tend to mirror each other. And unfortunately, they tend to be a high number of African-American young men and males in general. And so making sure that everybody is culturally sensitive and willing to work with that population.
Thank you. I also wanted to ask someone about the concept of treating gun violence as a public health crisis. I was speaking to an activist earlier today, and they said that would suggest that we would treat it like, breast cancer or heart disease And these are conditions that have organizations that are allowed to fundraise millions, hundreds of millions of dollars annually. So what outside fundraising efforts has the city looked to employ to treat gun violence this same way?
So I would say to you, we certainly do try and talk to philanthropists and our community partners. We are supported in different ways, both around our criminal justice reform efforts and our gun violence work, which all of this stuff is tied together. There are a number of foundations, including the Philadelphia Foundation and others that are definitely working with us. We continue to seek additional funds, if we can, around a number of areas. We apply for grants as they come forward, whether they be from the Department of Justice or from our state partners. We receive some funding and additional stuff, but we continuously look and seek out and apply for anything that we can that will help to stem this tide of gun violence, or that will help us with our reentry work as or our criminal justice reform, as all of these areas are tied together.
And my final question was about the Department of Behavioral Health training program. I know that now they're probably virtual, but prior to the pandemic, where were those located? Were they brought to neighborhood rec centers, parks? Where could people have access to that?
So I will start, and then Andre, you can jump in. The mental health first aid program, those have been in private sectors, in faith communities. They've been, we've had some in government, before the pandemic. During the pandemic, they moved to a virtual platform. And that was kind of just getting started toward the end of the pandemic. So I'm not sure if they've returned to in-person trainings or not. The CIT training, crisis intervention training that we do with Philadelphia Police. Before the pandemic, of course, those were in person. 40 hours a week with Philadelphia Police. And during the pandemic, again, moved some of those to virtual. And my understanding, at least the last couple that we've had have been in person again as well. In September, we'll start those up again with Philadelphia Police. Those will be in person. We also had training, a CIT version that was lighter than the 40-hour one a day per week, 8 hours, which we did with our Philadelphia Police radio room operators. And so we've done those in person as well. And so those are the trainings that that I'm responsible for, that I'm aware of. And Dre, if you want to add anything to that, please do.
Yes. So pre the pandemic, the trauma awareness trainings took place in the community, and since then they've been virtual. Similarly, the Network of Neighbors training to train new volunteers did take place in person, but it has since been virtual. But those trainings, as well as the screenings in the community and both online at healthymindsphilly.com, are all still happening.
And when you say in the community, like what types of locations were they held?
So for the trauma awareness training and the mental health first aid, we'll respond and go to any community setting where it's requested. I can give you some examples of where that has been, but there's no place that we won't go. We meet the community where they are to do the training.
And what are like an example, just one or two?
Sure. So rec centers would be an example. Faith organizations.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you all. That concludes today's briefing. We will reconvene in 2 weeks on Wednesday, August 4th. Take care.